21. Most shocking family secrets hidden by Hollywood's greatest stars. Beneath the dazzling diamonds and perfect smiles of Hollywood's golden age lay a graveyard of buried truths and manufactured lies. You think you know your favorite icons, but behind the closed doors of MGM and Warner Brothers, a sinister machine was rewriting their DNA. Mothers were recast as sisters. Biological children were rebranded as adoptions, and true loves were sacrificed for studio-mandated shams. Today, at Celebrity Couples Hollywood, we are tearing down the velvet curtain to expose the 21 most chilling family secrets they tried to take to the grave. Are you ready to see the real faces behind the legends? Subscribe now and hit the bell. The truth starts right here. Merle Oberon. Merle Oberon's existence was a masterpiece of cinematic orchestration, a delicate facade maintained with the precision of a high-stakes thriller. Born Estelle Merle O'Brien Thompson in Bombay, her heritage was a complex tapestry of British, South Asian, and Maori roots. However, in the exclusionary climate of 1930s Hollywood, such a background was considered a professional death sentence. To navigate this prejudice, the studio system engineered a radical reinvention. They claimed she was born in Tasmania, Australia, a remote location where a convenient courthouse fire had supposedly incinerated all birth records, making her fabrication nearly impossible to debunk. Her physical appearance was managed with equal intensity. Oberon frequently underwent skin lightening treatments and relied on the strategic genius of cinematographers who used high-key lighting to minimize her natural olive complexion on camera. This obsession with whiteness was not merely vanity. It was a survival mechanism in an era where passing was the only gateway to leading roles. Privately, her domestic life was a hall of mirrors. Her mother, Charlotte, who had given birth at 12 due to horrific family abuse, was presented to the world as Merle's maid or older sister. This cruel displacement meant that Oberon lived her public life under the constant shadow of potential exposure. Even as she captivated audiences in Wuthering Heights, Merle remained a fugitive of her own history. She avoided visiting Australia for decades, fearing that local scrutiny would dismantle her Tasmanian origin story. The psychological toll of this lifelong performance was immense, resulting in a guarded persona that few could penetrate. It wasn't until after her death in 1979 that the full scope of her ancestry was revealed. Her legacy is now viewed through a modern lens. She was an extraordinary pioneer who navigated a bigoted industry by sacrificing her identity to become an eternal icon of the silver screen. Rita Hayworth. Rita Hayworth was heralded as the love goddess of the 1940s, a title that masked a systematic annihilation of her authentic self. Born Margarita Carmen Cancino, she was a prodigious talent within the legendary Cancino dancing family. However, the path to her iconic status was paved with trauma and forced assimilation. Before she became the auburn-haired siren of Gilda, she was a dark-haired Spanish dancer subjected to the horrific whims of her father, Eduardo. Under the guise of a professional partnership, Eduardo reportedly exploited and abused his daughter, a dark chapter that left Rita with lifelong emotional scars and a profound sense of isolation. When Hollywood beckoned, the industry's gatekeepers decided that Margarita was too Mediterranean for the American palate. To satisfy the era's xenophobic aesthetic, she was handed over to studio technicians for a grueling physical overhaul. Her later years were marked by a tragic descent into Alzheimer's disease, which was initially mistaken for alcoholism due to the era's lack of medical understanding. Her story is a poignant critique of Hollywood's golden age, a regime that could manufacture a goddess from a broken girl, but could never offer her the sanctuary she truly deserved. Jack Nicholson. Jack Nicholson's life story contains a plot twist more staggering than any of the legendary screenplays he brought to life. For 37 years, the man who would become the face of Hollywood's counterculture believed he was the son of John and Ethel Mae Nicholson, and that a vivacious showgirl named June was his fun-loving older sister. This domestic arrangement was a meticulously maintained fiction, a white lie, designed to shield the family from the brutal social judgment of 1930s America. In reality, June was Jack's biological mother, having become pregnant at 17. To preserve June's reputation and Jack's future, his grandmother, Ethel May, stepped in to play the role of mother, effectively erasing the generational truth to satisfy the era's demand for respectability. The revelation of this deception arrived not through a deathbed confession, but via a cold call from a Time magazine researcher in 1974. At the peak of his fame, just as Chinatown was cementing his status as a cinematic titan, Nicholson was confronted with the fact that his entire foundational identity was a fabrication. By the time the truth surfaced, both June and Ethel May had passed away, leaving Jack with a hollow space where the answers to his questions should have been. While many would have spiraled into a crisis of betrayal, Nicholson handled the news with a characteristic stoic brand of cool. He viewed the secret not as a personal assault, but as a testament to the profound sacrifices women made to survive in a less forgiving time. This hidden history adds a layer of complexity to Nicholson's magnetic intensity on screen. One cannot help but wonder if the underlying sense of something hidden contributed to his unparalleled ability to portray characters wrestling with internal chaos and societal masks. Bobby Darin. Bobby Darin was a whirlwind of ambition and versatility, a man who conquered the charts with Mac the Knife while hiding a fragile heart, both literally and figuratively. Born Robert Walden Cassato, Darin's entire existence was fueled by a desperate race against time. Having suffered from severe rheumatic fever as a child, he knew his heart was a ticking time bomb. However, the most profound shock to his system wasn't medical, but genealogical. At the age of 32, while contemplating a political career, Darin discovered that the woman he called Mother, Polly, was actually his grandmother. Nina, the woman he had teased and loved as his older sister, was his biological mother, who had conceived him at 17 and surrendered her maternal identity to protect the family from the era's crushing illegitimacy stigma. This revelation shattered Darin's sense of self. Unlike Jack Nicholson's stoic acceptance, Bobby was devastated by the decades of institutionalized deception. The discovery triggered a radical metamorphosis. The polished, tuxedo-clad nightclub crooner vanished, replaced by a somber, denim-wearing protest singer. He retreated to a trailer in Big Sur, grew a mustache, and changed his name to Bob Darin, attempting to find an authenticity that had been denied to him since birth. His music shifted from breezy pop to biting social commentary, reflecting the internal chaos of a man who realized his very name and lineage were studio-approved fabrications. The emotional weight of this secret undoubtedly exacerbated his failing health. Friends noted that after learning the truth, the vibrant light behind his eyes seemed to dim. He became obsessed with truth and transparency, perhaps as a rebellion against the shadow-filled household of his youth. Darin passed away at just 37 during open-heart surgery, leaving behind a legacy of immense talent marred by a truncated search for identity. He spent his final years trying to reconcile the Bobby Darin the world adored with the Robert Cassato he finally understood himself to be, a man born of a secret, living on borrowed time. Gene Tierney. Gene Tierney was the quintessential aristocratic beauty of the 1940s, possessing a porcelain elegance that felt almost otherworldly. However, her life was struck by a tragedy so precise and cruel, it seemed like a haunting work of fiction. In 1943, while pregnant with her first child, Tierney made a brief appearance at a Hollywood USO event. Decades later, she would learn that a fan, who was supposed to be under quarantine for rubella, German measles, had broken out just to catch a glimpse of the star. This reckless act of admiration had devastating consequences. Tierney contracted the virus, which led to her daughter Daria being born deaf, partially blind, and severely developmentally disabled. The studio system, obsessed with Tierney's image as the flawless Laura, pressured her to hide the child's existence to avoid any unattractive associations with her brand. For years, Daria was placed in private care facilities while Tierney maintained the facade of a glamorous leading lady. The crushing guilt and the forced secrecy regarding her daughter's condition took an immense psychological toll. Tierney's mental health plummeted, leading to a series of nervous breakdowns and confinement in psychiatric hospitals, where she underwent numerous electroshock therapy sessions. The once shining star became a ghost of her former self, struggling to reconcile her public perfection with her private heartbreak. The final twist in this sorrowful narrative came years later at a party, when a woman approached Tierney and boasted about breaking quarantine to meet her during the war, unaware of the destruction she had caused. Tierney stood in stunned silence, a moment that encapsulated the terrifying price of celebrity. Her story eventually became the inspiration for Agatha Christie's The Mirror Cracked from Side to Side. Tierney eventually found a measure of peace, but her legacy remains a somber reminder that behind the most beautiful faces in cinema can lie a grief so profound it defies the art of acting. Clara Bow. Clara Bow, the original It Girl, was the incandescent spirit of the Roaring Twenties, symbolizing a new era of female liberation and sexual autonomy. Yet the vibrant energy she displayed on screen was a frantic escape from a childhood that was nothing short of a gothic nightmare. Born into the tenements of Brooklyn, Bow's early life was defined by extreme poverty and the terrifying instability of her mother, Sarah, who suffered from severe mental psychosis. In one horrific incident, Clara awoke to find her mother holding a butcher knife to her throat, convinced that killing her daughter would save her from the hardships of the world. This environment of domestic terror left Clara with a lifelong stutter and a deep-seated anxiety that she masked with her bubbly persona. The Hollywood studios exploited Bow's jazz baby image while working overtime to bury her traumatic origins. They marketed her as a carefree flapper, but privately she was a woman drowning in the effects of untreated PTSD. As she rose to become the industry's biggest box office draw, the pressure to maintain the facade of the happy-go-lucky girl began to fracture her psyche. She was frequently subject to cruel tabloid rumors and morality investigations by the very studios that profited from her fame. The transition from silent films to talkies exacerbated her insecurities, as she feared her Brooklyn accent and her nervous stutter would alienate the audiences who worshipped her. Ultimately, the weight of her hidden past and the exploitative nature of the industry led to a premature retirement at the age of 26. Bow retreated from the limelight, spending much of her later life in psychiatric care and seclusion. Her story is a stark contrast to the glittering flapper era she personified. It reveals a survivor who used the silver screen as a sanctuary from a reality filled with violence and neglect. Clara Bow wasn't just a trendsetter, she was a pioneer of the human cost of fame, proving that even the brightest it girl could be haunted by a darkness that no amount of studio lighting could ever erase. Raymond Burr. Raymond Burr, legendary for his portrayal of the unwavering legal titan Perry Mason, lived a life defined by a performance far more complex than any courtroom drama. In the stifling atmosphere of 1950s Hollywood, Burr understood that his career as a leading man would vanish instantly if the truth of his homosexuality were revealed. To safeguard his professional viability, he constructed an elaborate, tragic backstory that he maintained with stoic conviction for decades. He fabricated a history of lost love, claiming to have been married to a woman named Annette Sutherland, who allegedly perished in the same 1943 plane crash that killed actor Leslie Howard. He further embellished this fiction with the heart-wrenching addition of a young son who had purportedly died of leukemia. In reality, neither the wife nor the child ever existed. These were literary inventions designed to evoke public sympathy and cement his image as a grieving, masculine widower, effectively silencing any rumors regarding his private life. Behind this shroud of calculated grief, Burr shared a quiet, devoted existence with his partner, Robert Benavidez, whom he met on the set of Perry Mason. For over 35 years, they lived together, operating a vineyard and breeding orchids, all while the public remained convinced of Burr's solitary, tragic bachelorhood. The discipline required to maintain such a massive deception for nearly half a century speaks to the immense pressure of an era that demanded authenticity on screen but prohibited it in life. When Burr passed away in 1993, he left the bulk of his estate to Benavidez, finally acknowledging the man who had been his true anchor. His story is a testament to the lavender scare of Hollywood's golden age, a period where stars were forced to become architects of their own myths just to survive. Raymond Burr's greatest legacy is not merely his contribution to television history, but the quiet resilience he displayed while navigating a society that offered him no room to be himself. He played the role of the ultimate defender of truth on screen, all while guarding the most intimate truth of his own heart. Rock Hudson. Rock Hudson was the definitive American heartthrob, a towering figure of masculinity whose broad shoulders and baritone voice made him the ideal romantic lead for the post-war generation. However, the man the world knew as Rock Hudson was a meticulously manufactured product of the studio system. Born Roy Harold Shearer Jr., his transition into stardom required the absolute suppression of his identity as a gay man. His legendary agent, Henry Wilson, went to extreme lengths to protect the Rock Hudson brand, even arranging a sham marriage to his own secretary, Phyllis Gates, in 1955 to quell rising whispers in the tabloid press. Hudson spent his prime years living a double life, performing as the ultimate suitor to women like Doris Day on screen, while navigating a clandestine world of hidden relationships off-screen. The psychological burden of this deception was immense. Hudson lived under a constant state of surveillance and fear, knowing that a single leaked photograph or a misplaced word could end his multi-million-dollar career. He became a master of deflection, perfecting a persona that was charming yet emotionally distant. Despite the artifice, Hudson was deeply beloved by his colleagues, many of whom participated in an open secret culture, protecting him from a predatory media. His life was a high-stakes masquerade that only began to unravel in the 1980s, when his health began to visibly fail due to the burgeoning AIDS epidemic. Hudson's final act was perhaps his most courageous. By publicly disclosing his AIDS diagnosis in 1985, he became the first major global celebrity to put a human face on a disease that was being ignored and stigmatized. His death later that year shattered the silence surrounding the epidemic and forced a global reckoning with the reality of the crisis. While he lived his life in the shadows of a forced persona, his passing brought a monumental shift in public awareness. Rock Hudson's legacy is a poignant irony. He spent his life hiding who he was to be loved by millions, but it was his ultimate vulnerability in the face of death that changed the world forever. Spencer Tracy. Spencer Tracy was widely considered the actor's actor, a man whose rugged, unpretentious style defined the gold standard of cinematic realism. However, beneath his stoic exterior lay a soul tormented by a profound spiritual and personal conflict. A devout Catholic, Tracy's life was upended in 1925 when his son John was born deaf. In an era where disability was often viewed through a lens of divine judgment, Tracy was consumed by a devastating guilt, believing his son's condition was a direct punishment for his own perceived moral failings. This psychological weight drove him toward a lifelong battle with alcoholism and chronic insomnia, as he struggled to reconcile his deep-seated faith with the realities of his family life. The most enduring secret of Tracy's life was his 26-year romantic entanglement with Katharine Hepburn. Though he had legally separated from his wife, Louise, in the late 1930s, His religious convictions made divorce an impossibility. This created a permanent state of emotional limbo. Tracy lived a double life, maintaining a public image as a devoted, though estranged, family man, while sharing an intimate domestic reality with Hepburn. They became Hollywood's most famous open secret, protected by a loyal circle of friends and a studio system that respected their privacy. Tracy's internal struggle was palpable in his performances. He brought a weary, lived-in wisdom to his roles that mirrored his own exhaustion from carrying a secret for nearly 3 decades. Tracy's health eventually succumbed to the toll of his habits and the stress of his dual existence. Throughout his final years, Hepburn remained his constant companion and caretaker, though she famously stayed away from his funeral out of respect for his legal wife and family. Tracy's legacy is one of immense talent, shadowed by an agonizing sense of duty. He was a man caught between the dogma of his church and the reality of his heart, a conflict that made him one of the most relatable and human figures in film history, even as he kept the world at a calculated distance. Katharine Hepburn. Katharine Hepburn was a revolutionary force in Hollywood. A woman whose fiercely independent spirit and refusal to conform to traditional feminine roles made her a singular icon of strength. With her sharp wit and preference for trousers, she challenged the gender norms of the 1930s and 40s. Yet for all her public boldness, Hepburn lived a private life of remarkable discretion and self-sacrifice. Her legendary romance with Spencer Tracy required her to inhabit a shadow role that contradicted her persona as a liberated woman. For over a quarter of a century, the woman who took orders from no one navigated the complexities of being the other woman, prioritizing Tracy's emotional stability and his religious boundaries over her own desire for public recognition. Hepburn's commitment to Tracy was absolute. She paused her thriving career multiple times to care for him during his bouts of illness and alcoholism, providing a sanctuary that the public never saw. To protect the sanctity of their relationship and Tracy's public reputation, she accepted a life of clandestine dinners and separate entrances. She famously remarked, "I loved him, and I wanted to be with him. If I couldn't have him the way most people do, I would have him the way I could." This surrender of ego from a woman known for her immense pride reveals a depth of character that her screen roles only hinted at. It was only after the death of Tracy's wife, Louise, in 1983, and long after Tracy's own passing, that Hepburn began to speak openly about their relationship in her autobiography. Her silence for those decades was not born of shame, but of a profound, protective love. Hepburn's story is a fascinating study in contradictions. A pioneer of modern womanhood who chose to live by a vintage code of loyalty. She proved that one could be both a powerhouse of independence and a pillar of steadfast devotion, leaving behind a legacy that is as much about the quiet strength of her character as it is about her 4 Academy Awards. Joan Crawford. Joan Crawford was the ultimate personification of Hollywood's self-made royalty. A woman who meticulously engineered her transformation from a struggling dancer into a regal screen icon. However, the image of maternal perfection she projected throughout the 1940s, frequently posing for fan magazines in coordinated outfits with her 4 adopted children, was shattered just a year after her death in 1977. Her eldest daughter, Christina, published the explosive memoir Mommy Dearest, revealing a private world of domestic tyranny, psychological warfare, and physical violence. The book painted a portrait of a woman who viewed motherhood as another production to be directed, demanding absolute obedience and performing night raids to inspect her children's cleanliness with terrifying ferocity. The most infamous detail of this hidden life was the wire hanger incident, where Crawford allegedly spiraled into a violent rage over a garment found in Christina's closet. Behind the closed doors of her Brentwood estate, Crawford was described as an alcoholic, struggling with the fading of her youth and the immense pressure of staying relevant in a youth-obsessed industry. Her obsession with control was a byproduct of her own impoverished, unstable upbringing. She had survived through sheer willpower and expected the same military-grade discipline from her children. While two of her younger daughters disputed Christina's claims, the revelation created a permanent schism in Crawford's legacy, shifting her public image from a glamorous star to a cautionary tale of the toxic intersection between celebrity and private pathology. The mystery of Crawford's family life was further darkened by the shadowy nature of her adoptions. It was later revealed that at least one of her children was sourced through Georgia Tan, a notorious black market baby trafficker. Whether Crawford knew the illegal origins of these arrangements remains a subject of debate, but it adds a chilling layer to her desperate quest to curate a perfect family. In the end, Crawford's greatest role was perhaps her own life, a high-stakes performance maintained with such intensity that the mask only slipped once she was no longer there to hold it in place. She died, leaving her two eldest children nothing, an act of finality that mirrored the rigid control she exerted until her last breath. Bing Crosby. Bing Crosby was the king of Christmas, a man whose velvety baritone and easygoing charm made him the ultimate symbol of American paternal warmth. For decades, he embodied the moral center of the nation, playing wise priests and lovable fathers. However, the serene image of the Crosby household was a carefully curated facade that masked a regime of harsh, authoritarian discipline. In 1983, his eldest son, Gary Crosby, published Going My Own Way, a memoir that shattered the Father O'Malley persona. Gary described a childhood defined by fear, recalling weigh-ins for his weight issues and frequent beatings with a leather belt administered by a father who viewed emotional warmth as a sign of weakness. Crosby's private life was a stark contradiction to the Der Bingle persona the public adored. Influenced by a rigid Catholic upbringing and the pressures of his immense fame, he reportedly demanded perfection from his 4 sons with his first wife, Dixie Lee. While Dixie struggled with alcoholism in the shadows, Bing enforced a code of conduct so strict it left his children emotionally stunted. The psychological toll was profound. 2 of his sons, Lindsay and Dennis, eventually died by suicide in their later years, a tragedy that many attributed to the lasting scars of their repressed and traumatic upbringing. To the public, he was a source of comfort, but to his own children, he was an enigma of cold expectation and remote authority. The complexity of Crosby's secret life lies in the divide between his first and second families. After Dixie's death, he married Catherine Grant and fathered 3 more children, who remembered him as a much softer, gentler version of himself. This suggests a man who may have realized the cost of his earlier severity too late. Bing Crosby's legacy remains a haunting study in the duality of celebrity. He provided the soundtrack for a generation's peace of mind while leaving his own domestic peace in ruins. He died on a golf course in Spain, a serene ending for a man whose private life was anything but, leaving behind a world that still struggles to reconcile the voice of an angel with the hand of a disciplinarian. Charlie Chaplin. Gray's eventual divorce filing was a sensational document that briefly lifted the veil on Chaplin's private pathology, alleging that he had pressured her for an illegal abortion and subjected her to emotional cruelty. Despite the settlement becoming the most expensive in Hollywood history at the time, Chaplin's artistic genius allowed him to survive the fallout. He continued to pursue much younger women, eventually finding stability with Una O'Neill, who was just 18 to his 54 when they married. While their union was long-lasting, it highlighted a power dynamic that would be scrutinized far more harshly by modern standards than by the star-worshipping culture of the early 20th century. The secret of Chaplin's life wasn't just his appetite for youth, but the immense machinery of silence that protected him. He was a man who understood the mechanics of pathos on screen, but often lacked empathy in his intimate relationships. His eventual exile from the United States was fueled by political tensions, yet his domestic controversies provided the ammunition his detractors needed to dismantle his public standing. Chaplin remains a towering figure of cinematic innovation, but his legacy is haunted by the realization that the man who made the world smile often left a trail of fractured lives in the shadows of his brilliance. Gloria Graham. Gloria Graham was the smoldering queen of film noir, a woman whose sultry voice and pouty lips defined the femme fatale archetype in classics like The Big Heat. However, her private life featured a scandal so bizarre and socially transgressive that it effectively annihilated her mainstream Hollywood career. In 1951, during her marriage to the acclaimed director Nicholas Ray, a domestic explosion occurred that felt like a dark script from one of their movies. Ray reportedly returned home to find Graham in bed with his 13-year-old son from a previous marriage, Tony Ray. This shocking discovery led to an immediate and bitter divorce, a secret that the studio system desperately attempted to bury beneath the floorboards of the industry. While the initial incident was shrouded in whispers, Graham did the unthinkable nearly a decade later. She secretly married Tony Ray, who was by then 23, in a small ceremony in Mexico. The revelation of this union during a subsequent custody battle for her other children sent shockwaves through a conservative society. The public and the industry, which were accustomed to many forms of vice, found the blurred lines of stepmother and husband to be an unforgivable taboo. Graham was effectively blacklisted from major productions. Her status shifted from an Oscar-winning actress to a social pariah, forcing her to spend her later years working in British theater and television far from the glittering lights of Los Angeles. The secret of Gloria Graham is a study in the defiance of social boundaries. She was a woman who seemed to live with the same moral ambiguity displayed by her screen characters, refusing to apologize for her unconventional and controversial choices. Her story, later chronicled in the film Film Stars Don't Die in Liverpool, reveals a vulnerable artist who suffered immensely under the weight of public condemnation. Graham's legacy is a haunting reminder that while Hollywood could forgive many sins, certain breaches of the family unit were considered terminal offenses. She died in 1981, having paid the ultimate price for a love story that the world refused to understand. Clark Gable. Clark Gable, the undisputed king of Hollywood, projected an aura of rugged, invincible masculinity that defined the American alpha male for a generation. However, beneath the swagger and the iconic mustache lay a secret that remained buried for nearly 60 years. In 1935, while filming The Call of the Wild on a remote, snowbound set in Washington state, Gable engaged in a brief, clandestine affair with his co-star, Loretta Young. When Young became pregnant, the discovery threatened to trigger a catastrophic scandal that would have violated the strict morality clauses of their studio contracts. Gable, a married man at the time and the industry's most valuable asset, remained in the shadows while a massive cover-up was orchestrated to protect his crown and Young's reputation. The secret was managed with the precision of a military operation. Gable never publicly acknowledged the child, a daughter named Judy Lewis, though he was fully aware of her existence. His involvement was limited to a single, surreal meeting when Judy was 15 years old. He visited her briefly, kissed her on the forehead, and departed without ever revealing he was her father. This emotional distance was the price of his professional survival. While Gable continued to play the role of the heroic lead in classics like Gone with the Wind, he lived with the knowledge that a piece of his legacy was growing up in plain sight, disguised as an adopted child. Gable died in 1960, taking the secret to his grave. He never saw his daughter reach adulthood or witness her eventually uncovering the truth of her parentage. His story reflects the brutal trade-offs of the Golden Age, where stars were often forced to choose between their biological kin and their cinematic immortality. Gable's king persona was a fortress built on silence, proving that even the most powerful man in Hollywood was subject to the rigid social engineering of the studio system. He remains a legend, but one whose personal history is forever tethered to a daughter he could never claim. Loretta Young. Loretta Young was the epitome of Hollywood's steel magnolia, a woman of immense beauty and unwavering Catholic faith who navigated the industry's treacherous waters with calculated grace. However, her most masterful performance was a lifelong deception involving her biological daughter. After her secret affair with Clark Gable resulted in a pregnancy, Young faced a devastating dilemma. An out-of-wedlock birth would have ended her career and resulted in excommunication from her church. To survive, she vanished from the public eye under the guise of an extended vacation, secretly gave birth to her daughter Judy, and placed the infant in an orphanage. In a final audacious act of social theater, she adopted the child a year later, raising her own daughter under a fraudulent legal status. The psychological complexity of Young's secret was profound. She raised Judy in an environment of strict discipline and religious fervor. Yet she subjected the girl to painful plastic surgeries to pin back her prominent ears, a distinctive Gable trait that threatened to expose the truth. Young spent decades living a lie, maintaining the facade of a virginal, devout star, while her biological daughter grew up confused and emotionally distanced, sensing a mysterious void in her history. The strain of keeping this secret required Young to become a master of compartmentalization, protecting her public image as a moral compass while privately harboring a truth that could have dismantled her entire world. The secret only began to unravel in 1966, when Young finally confessed the truth to Judy in a private conversation, yet she still demanded public silence. It wasn't until the publication of Judy's memoir, Uncommon Knowledge, in 1994, that the world learned the full extent of the cover-up. Young's story is a chilling study of the lengths to which a woman would go to preserve her standing in a society that offered no mercy for human frailty. She died in 2000, having lived nearly her entire life behind a curtain of manufactured respectability. Her legacy is one of survival and contradiction, a star who chose the sanctuary of a lie over the vulnerability of the truth. Ingrid Bergman. Ingrid Bergman was the ethereal personification of Saint Ingrid, a woman whose luminous performance in Casablanca made her a global symbol of purity and noble sacrifice. However, the international public was unprepared for the moment the saint decided to be human. In 1949, while still married to Dr. Petter Lindstrom, Bergman sent a fateful letter to the Italian director Roberto Rossellini, expressing her desire to work with him. What began as an artistic collaboration quickly ignited into a passionate affair. When the news broke that Bergman was not only leaving her husband and daughter, but was also pregnant with Rossellini's child, the backlash was seismic. The moral outrage was so intense that she was denounced on the floor of the United States Senate as a powerful influence for evil. The secret behind Bergman's scandal was her refusal to live behind a facade of studio-mandated perfection. Unlike many of her contemporaries who hid their indiscretions, Ingrid chose to live her truth openly, a decision that led to her effectively being exiled from Hollywood for 7 years. The perfect image the industry had crafted for her became a cage that the public refused to let her leave. She was burned in effigy and blacklisted, forced to rebuild her life in Europe, while the American press painted her as a fallen woman. This period of isolation was a grueling test of her resilience, as she navigated a world that had suddenly turned its back on its favorite daughter for the crime of following her heart. The eventual reconciliation between Bergman and the American public is a legendary chapter in film history. In 1956, she made a triumphant return with Anastasia, winning her second Academy Award and proving that her talent was more enduring than the public's moral posturing. Her story remains a pivotal case study in the intersection of celebrity, morality, and female autonomy. Bergman didn't just hide a secret. She challenged the hypocrisy of an industry that sold fantasies of love but punished the reality of it. She died in 1982, leaving a legacy of courage, having shown that a woman could lose everything to gain her own identity and still return to the throne. Judy Garland. Judy Garland, the girl who walked the yellow brick road to immortality, lived a life that was a brutal laboratory of studio exploitation and family secrets. Born Frances Ethel Gumm, the first secret of her childhood was her father's rumored sexuality. The family moved frequently to escape brewing scandals involving his alleged advances toward young men. This instability laid the groundwork for a life of perpetual insecurity. By the time she was signed to MGM at age 13, the studio system became her surrogate parent, but one that was predatory rather than protective. To keep up with grueling 18-hour workdays, the studio allegedly forced pep pills, amphetamines, and downers, barbiturates, on the young girl, igniting a lifelong cycle of addiction that was hidden from the adoring public. Behind the vibrant, belting voice that captivated millions lay the secret of a woman who was systematically told she was unattractive. Studio executives, most notably Louis B. Mayer, referred to her as the Little Hunchback and placed her on restrictive diets that often consisted of only black coffee and chicken soup. This psychological abuse was a closely guarded industry secret, ensuring the world saw only the wholesome girl next door, while Garland was privately collapsing under the weight of body dysmorphia and substance abuse. Her life was a tragic paradox. She provided the world with its ultimate sense of wonder, while her own wonder was being harvested for profit. The most poignant secret Garland carried was the immense loneliness of being a commodity. Even as she married 5 times and struggled through multiple nervous breakdowns, she remained a captive of the very stardom that fed her. Her later years were marked by financial ruin and a desperate search for the affection she felt she had missed as a child. Garland's death at just 47 from an accidental overdose was the final, tragic note in a song that had been strained for decades. Her legacy is a haunting critique of the Golden Age, a reminder that the stars who shone the brightest were often burning out in a darkness the public was never allowed to see. Jerry Lewis. Jerry Lewis was the manic dynamo of American comedy, a performer whose rubber-faced antics and nutty professor persona defined slapstick for a generation. While he was celebrated as a global humanitarian for his decades-long commitment to the Muscular Dystrophy Association, his private life was a stark landscape of cold detachment and unresolved bitterness. The most shocking secret of the Lewis household was revealed upon his death in 2017, when his will became public. In a final vindictive act that stunned the industry, Lewis explicitly disinherited all 6 of his sons from his first marriage to Patty Palmer. The document was a cold, legal manifestation of a domestic rift that had simmered for decades, proving that the man who made the world laugh could be a figure of profound severity at home. Beyond the disinheritance, Lewis harbored a long-denied secret involving a daughter born outside of his marriages. For decades, a woman named Susan Minoret claimed to be his biological child, the result of an affair in the 1950s. Despite DNA evidence and her striking resemblance to the comedian, Lewis refused to acknowledge her existence or provide any form of support. This refusal to confront his own lineage created a dark counter-narrative to his public image as a champion of children's health. Behind the scenes, he was described as a controlling and often volatile patriarch who demanded absolute loyalty but struggled to offer emotional warmth in return. The duality of Jerry Lewis is a haunting study in the tears of a clown archetype. He spent his life seeking the unconditional love of a massive audience to fill a void left by his own parents, vaudevillians who frequently left him in the care of relatives. This early abandonment seemingly manifested in a complex adult life where he swung between immense generosity and shocking cruelty. While his cinematic legacy is one of pure, unadulterated joy, the secrets of his family life reveal a man who lived in a state of perpetual emotional warfare. He died at 91, leaving behind a fortune and a legendary career, but also a fractured family whose pain became the final headline of his storied life. Barbara Stanwyck. Barbara Stanwyck was the definitive tough girl of Hollywood's golden age, a performer who possessed a gritty, unsentimental strength that made her a favorite of directors like Frank Capra and Billy Wilder. Born Ruby Stevens in the tenements of Brooklyn, Stanwyck's early life was a grueling exercise in survival. Her mother died in a freak accident when she was 4, and her father abandoned the family shortly after. This orphan's resilience became the core of her screen persona, but it also masked a private life filled with domestic turbulence and a profound inability to find maternal peace. Her secret struggle was not one of scandal, but of the deep emotional scars left by a childhood that offered no sanctuary. Her marriage to actor Robert Taylor was Hollywood's ultimate arranged union, orchestrated by the studios to protect Taylor's masculine image amidst whispers of his sexuality. While the public saw a glamorous power couple, Stanwyck lived within a marriage of convenience that lacked the emotional intimacy she desperately craved. Even more tragic was her relationship with her adopted son, Anthony. Stanwyck, having never experienced a healthy maternal bond herself, reportedly struggled with the demands of motherhood. The relationship became so toxic and estranged that she eventually cut him out of her life entirely, a secret heartbreak that she buried beneath her professional work ethic. She became a woman who lived for the set, finding the only home she understood in the light of the cameras. Stanwyck's secret was the armor she wore to survive. She refused to play the victim of her tragic past, preferring to be seen as the formidable, self-reliant professional. Behind the scenes, she was known for her immense kindness to film crews, but maintained a cold distance from her own kin. The golden facade of classic Hollywood was a masterpiece of studio engineering, where stars traded their authentic identities for cinematic immortality. From faked lineages and hidden children to suppressed orientations, these 21 legends lived in a permanent state of performance. While the celebrity couples Hollywood of the past were often manufactured for publicity, the human cost was staggering, leaving behind a trail of fractured families and buried truths. But this raises a provocative question. Did these mandatory deceptions preserve the magic of the silver screen, or did they simply destroy the people behind the icons? Whose secret do you think was the most tragic?